Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over a custom set of cards based around events, items, and characters from the movie Ant-Man and the Wasp. This is just one video in a massive series I'm doing called Magic the Marveling, where I take every single Marvel Cinematic Universe movie and turn it into a Magic the Gathering set. Together, they make a huge set made up of almost 1,000 cards at this point, and you don't need to have seen all the other videos to understand this one. There's just a couple things I have to go over. First off, there are some new creature types added, as you would probably expect, and two of the main ones are Hero and Villain. Now, to save space on the type line, when you see a hero, it will not say legendary creature human hero, it will say legendary hero human. And this is just because there are some characters, for instance like Thor, who if they didn't have this change, would be a legendary creature as guardian god noble hero. And that's just too many types. And so I did this to simplify it. Now, heroes are generally in the colors of blue, white, and red. However, they sometimes splash into green, and Ant-Man is one of those examples where that happens. And villains are generally black, blue, and red. So if you wonder why a certain character maybe fits into the colors that I put them in, I also compare them to other characters and what colors they've been put into in the past. Also, there are some custom mechanics, and Ant-Man is one of those characters that uses two custom mechanics, those being Tiny and Giant, and they're similar to like Menace, where they're going to affect the creature. But as we jump into this, we will look at them a little bit. Alright, so why don't we jump right into this? Starting off, we have Ant-Man Quantum Survivor. He's 3 red-green for a legendary hero human rogue. And this is one thing I want to say. If you watched my previous Ant-Man video, not Ant-Man and the Wasp, I originally had them as thieves, and I had thief as a creature type. But to give the cards that cared about thieves a little bit more synergy with the outside Magic universe, I changed them all to rogues, thanks to a commenter who really was like, hey, you should do this. And I'm like, that's a really good idea, so I did that. And then he's a 4/4 with Trample, and he says, whenever a creature you control, first off, he says partner with Wasp. So this movie is called Ant-Man and the Wasp. It made a lot of sense to make these two partner together. He's a 4/4 with Trample for 5, and he says, whenever a creature you control with Giant or Tiny deal combat damage to a player, you may phase that creature out. So kind of going into the quantum realm, phasing out. It's kind of how I'm representing it in these cards. If you do, draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on target legendary creature you control. So yeah, this allows you to do a couple things. First, it means that your creatures are safe on your opponent's turn, which is really, really powerful. But more importantly, it means that they're not around. So if they have any effects, those effects are going to end. If you wanted to use them as a blocker because they have vigilance, well, they're phased out so they can't. And then it also lets you either boost up Ant-Man or maybe the Wasp, who may have a little bit of caring about how big power and toughness it is. So then he also has an ability, pay 1 and tap to put a giant counter on target creature or remove a giant counter from target creature. So giant counters are very similar to like vigilance counters from Ikoria. They give the creature giant. And you may be asking yourself, what is giant or what is tiny? Well, giant is a keyword similar to menace, where it's going to give the creatures to like different kind of abilities that are just like, hey, this is what happens. For instance, creatures with giant can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, spells that target them cost less, and they can block flyers. So what do these represent? Well, they're giant, so you're going to need a lot of creatures to block them. Well, they're giant, so it's easier to hit them with spells, and they can block flyers because, hey, they're giant. And then Tiny says they can't be blocked except by other creatures with Tiny or Vigilance, or of course walls, because, walls can block even small things. It's because if you're Vigilant or Tiny, it's easy to block someone who's tiny, and spells that targeted actually cost more, and this is a symmetrical effect. So while giant may sound awful because they're going to be easier to kill, it means that spells you target it with also cost less. So it's kind of this give and take, and so that may be why you want to remove a counter with Ant-Man, because hey, I don't want my creatures able to be targeted more. Now, the reason he focuses around giant so much, where last time he focused around tiny, is because, well, in this movie, he spends a lot more time growing or being in between sizes, versus in the other movie, it was all about shrinking. Now, why don't we look at Wasp? Wasp is 2 blue and a green for legendary hero human scientist 3/3, and it says partner with AntMan Quantum Survivor. So if you look at it, it's green, blue, and red. Those are their colors, and then it has flying, and it says each creature with tiny can't be blocked. So this is just improving the tiny ability. And then it has a very similar ability to AntMan. Pay 1, tap, put a tiny counter on target creature, or remove a tiny counter from target creature. So you can kind of manipulate your entire board to either be tiny, which can't be blocked, or giant, which, if you notice, AntMan cares about when creatures with, deal damage. It's very interesting. So, when you have them both on the field, you're able to really manipulate your creatures and go shrink big, shrink tall, or shrink big, shrink big, shrink small, grow tall, and do that as you see fit. In terms of putting counters on things and why they synergize, AntMan likes to put counters on things, which means that the unblockable damage will be bigger, and all that. So there's a lot of interesting synergy between these two. I think it'd be an interesting commander pair, and I think it makes sense that they have partner. I know that was a little bit of a long explanation, but I felt like it needed to be justified as to why I did everything. Yeah. Next, we have Hank Pym, Quantum Researcher. It's a blue and a red for a legendary creature, Human Scientist. Scientist is a new mechanic, or a new creature type, added by the set. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you may pay red. If you do, it gets +1/+1 and has haste until end of turn. So, yeah, you can actually give your opponent's creatures haste if you want, and +1/+1. This is, a powerful ability, but it is making you pay 1 extra for each creature, so it's not too insane, and it just lets you get out there quickly. And then he says creatures with counters on them get +1/+1 for each scientist you control. So why this is useful is, hey, if you have Hank Pym out with, say, Wasp or AntMan, they're putting counters on things, all of that. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic that they have, and I tried to preserve that dynamic. For instance, the original cards of Hope Van Dyne and Hank Pym are very synergistic, and I wanted to keep that. Next, we have Janet Van Dyne. Sorry, not Janet Van Dyne. Hope. Not Janet. Janet Van Dyne is a red, green, white legendary creature, enhanced human, 3/3 with vigilance, and whenever Janet Van Dyne attacks, you may have it gain tiny or giant until end of turn. So, yep, you get to just giant, tiny. Then you can pay 1 and tap, and you'll notice there's a lot of pay 1 and tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and loses all abilities until end of turn. And so this is kind of her... she has these powers to, help Ghost, and you'll notice that if you have Ghost on your team, you can kind of do some interesting things with this ability. So, yeah, you can manipulate abilities. So if there's abilities that are maybe a downside, you can get rid of them and get a little bit of an advantage that way. So I think it would also be an interesting commander, just in the fact that, hey, there's a huge creature that has a downside at your upkeep. Well, you can kind of use Janet Van Dyne to mitigate that downside. Next, we have Ghost. So this is a big, block of text, but it's 1 in a blue for a legendary villain enhanced human 0/0 with phasing. And whenever it enters the battlefield, with 3 +1/+1 counters on it and can't be blocked. Whenever Ghost is targeted by a spell, it phases out. Whenever Ghost deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of that player's library, choose and exile one of them face down, put the rest into their owner's graveyard. You may play the exiled card as long as it remains exiled. Remove a counter of your choice from Ghost. So the idea here is, enters with 3 counters, you can hit your opponent 3 times, but Ghost is slowly dying, very similar to the story of AntMan and the Wasp. And so what this allows you to do is it allows you to, he enters with 3 counters. If you can put more counters on it with something like AntMan or Wasp, you can kind of help it out a little bit. Whenever it's targeted by a spell, however, it phases out, so it's harder to put more counters on it. It also makes it so your opponents have a hard time killing it because, phasing in and out. It's a very big phasing matters kind of creature, and I think it works really well. I don't know how well it would work, say, as a commander, but I think as a card, it really encapsulates Ghost is dying. Ghost is elusive. It's going to deal damage and steal information as a shield operative, so I think it makes a lot of sense. Next, we have Bill Foster. It's a 4-cost, blue and red, legendary creature, human scientist 3/3. Each other creature you control gets +1/+1 for each phased-out creature you control. So, he did some research into the quantum realm and shrinking and growing, and so he can kind of look at that and give you an advantage based on your phased-out creatures by helping out Ghost. And then you can pay blue, 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 red, tap, discard a card, and another creature you control phases out. So in an emergency, you can save one of your creatures by discarding a card, paying a ton of mana and tapping him. So he's very just this expert in this field and just really shows that in his card. Next, we have Sunny Birch. He's one of the villains of the story. He's 2 black and a red for a legendary creature, human, 2/2, and whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls destroys a permanent you control, create a unit token. So unit tokens are kind of like a treasure token. You can see one on screen now. And then you can sacrifice 6 units, gain control of target artifact. So he's on the hunt for the mobile lab, and so you can kind of buy your way to this mobile lab if your opponent has it or whatever, and you kind of force your opponent to give it to you. So it's very thematic, it makes sense, and it's kind of interesting. It punishes your opponent for targeting you. Next, we have Lewis X-Con Head. It's a 5-cost red legendary creature, human rogue, 5/7, and it says rogues you control can't attack. So this is stopping, oh, we're not going to be thieves anymore, we're good guys now. But whenever a creature attacks another player, you may have that player gain control of Lewis X-Con Head until end of turn. If you do, draw a card. So you can basically say, if this is commander, hey, I'm going to give you my commander, and I'm going to draw a card because of that. But now, you get this extra attacker to help you, and theoretically you could do some interesting shenanigans with them owning your permanent for a turn, or controlling your permanent for a turn. So there's lots of interesting synergies you can build around. Obviously, rogues you control can't attack means you don't really want to put this in a rogues deck, and I think that's something that could be improved with the design of this card, but I like the way that it works. It's like, hey guys, we're not going to attack anymore, we're trying to help people. Next, we have Kurt X-Con Worker, 4-cost red legendary creature, human rogue, 3/3 with flash, and it costs 1 red less to cast if another player has cast 2 or more spells this turn. So you can have it come down for 1 in a red if your opponent have cast 2 or more spells this turn. And when it enters the battlefield, you may change any number of target spells or abilities with a single target to Kurt X-Con Worker. You're trying to say, hey, we'll fend the bad guys away, but then you end up targeting all the bad guys towards you. So it's kind of a response to save your creatures kind of thing, and I like the design of it. And then we have Dave X-Con Consultant, 1 in a red for a legendary creature, human rogue, 2/2 with flash, and you can tap, and target opponent may add red. If they do, create a unit token. So you can kind of pay your opponent to ramp them, or you can have your opponent pay you to ramp them, and it's a very, hey, I don't know if this would be a great, commander, but it's very balanced to the fact that your opponent can basically say no and you don't get anything out of it. And it lets you ramp up your opponent. It's a very interesting card. Next, we have the Van. It's a 4-cost red legendary artifact vehicle with haste, and it has crew 4, so it's a 4/4 with haste, essentially. And then as long as the Van is crewed by at least 1 rogue or hero, it gets +2/+2 for each rogue and hero crewing it, and has death touch. So you can give it death touch, you can give it, +2/+2 for each rogue. So it just encourages you to put this in a rogue deck. It's very interesting that way. Next, we have Jimmy Woo. It's a blue and a white for a legendary creature, human, 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, put in a rest counter on target creature. Creatures with the rest counters on them can't attack, so just kind of putting something on house arrest, and you can kind of get rid of Jimmy Woo or sneak around Jimmy Woo by maybe phasing him out, and then you can attack, and that is an interesting little synergy you can do there. Very blue-white in its application. I like the way it works. Next, we have Antonio Banderas. It's a green and a blue for a legendary creature, Ant 2/2 with Tiny and Reach. And then you can tap and target a non-Ant creature with Tiny gains flying until end of turn, which means, Tiny's already an evasive ability, so this one isn't super useful, but it does mean that if your opponent has Tiny creatures or Vigilant creatures, you can make them fly. And I think it makes sense that, hey, if you're a Tiny AntMan, you can also fly. I think this is very synergistic. And I guess there could be an argument for target non-Ant creature gains flying until end of turn, but it doesn't make sense for, this ant to be carrying Godzilla on its back. So next we have Ulysses S. Grant. It's a 3-cost green legendary creature, Ant 2/2 with Tiny and Reach again. And whenever an Ant creature you control attacks, Ulysses S. Grant gets +2/+2 or +1/+1 until end of turn, And then you can tap and target creature with Tiny becomes an Ant creature in addition to its other types. So you can kind of boost one of your creatures or turn one of your creatures into an ant and then maybe give it ant synergy in some other way. Kind of making Ant-Man one of the ants and part of the family or the colony, I should say. And yeah, I like the design of this as well. Ants are kind of an interesting little subclass thing that I put in here that I really enjoy. Next we have Quantum Realm. It's a 4-cost green and blue legendary enchantment with cumulative upkeep 1, kind of signifying how it's unstable and you really have to be scientific. You have to be like supplying power, and it's very difficult to get in and stay in the Quantum Realm. And so it will go away, and creatures you control with tiny can't be blocked and have hexproof, so just lets you basically say, hey, I'm going so small, you can't block me, you can't hit me, and you can pay 2 and a blue and tap and put a tiny counter on target creature. So obviously the Wasp does some of this, so this is kind of like the Wasp but an enchantment, and I like the design of it, although I am considering switching this over to a land and kind of switching its abilities completely. I don't know, let me know what you guys think about that idea in the comments down below. Next we have Quantum Tunnel. It's a 5-cost legendary artifact. Whenever a creature with tiny blocks or is blocked, it phases out. So yeah, that includes your opponent's creatures, and then you can pay 3 and a blue and tap, and target creature gains tiny until end of turn. So you can kind of pay for to kind of phase out your opponent's attacking creatures if you have a creature to block them. But you can also use it to phase out your own creatures. You can just use it to give things tiny. Very, very interesting in like how it can be used offensively and defensively, and I think it's pretty fun. Next, we have Quest to the Quantum Realm. It's green, blue, and a red, so that fits perfectly into AntMan and the Wasp color. You can create a scrap token, which is literally just a token artifact, and that's all it does for the purpose of being a token or an artifact. And then it says all creatures phase out. They don't phase in during their owner's turn. All creatures phase in, so essentially you're going to phase everything out for a turn, kind of just a stall card, and I think it has some interesting potential to actually be a pretty powerful card, although the triple colors is kind of hard. Now, the scrap token is supposed to represent how you need the tiny little ship, but it can be used in many other ways. For instance, if you're running an artifact deck, maybe you don't care so much that all your creatures are phasing out because you're playing an artifact deck. So yeah, I like this card. Yeah. So those are all of the cards. Now, I know, there's probably some mistakes on some of them. There are probably some cards that don't make sense, whatever. I recommend before you say, hey, you did this wrong, you check out the link in the description down below, and if you also, you can check it out for other reasons. But those are going to be the more updated versions of the cards. I obviously can only film this video once, and so there are bound to be changes to the cards in the future, so check that out. On top of that, these are not all of the cards. These are just the cards I had time to talk about today. So if you want to see some cards that are more based on events from the story, or more items, or even some characters, check those out in the link down below. There'll also be a link where you can see the whole Magic the Marvel League website, where you can check out all the other movies I've done. You're also probably seeing a bunch of them scrolling past. Let me know what you guys think about all these cards in the comments down below, and if you do find a mistake, let me know so I can get it fixed, or if you have ideas like the whole turning thieves into rogues, let me know about those as well. I hope you enjoyed. If you did and you want to see more awesome content like this, hit that subscribe button. I will see you guys in the next one.